and welcome to season 3 of Quarantine with Fulbrighters, where we bring you the best and the brightest minds from all across Pakistan. Fulbrighters who are creating a difference in their community, and we're going to talk about a topic that is oft talked about but seldom understood. So I'm quite excited to talk to Geti Ara Syed today about mental health. How are you doing, Geti?
I'm doing all right. I'm excited to be here too.
No, thank you so much for coming on. It's become quite a buzzword these days, mental health, and everybody seems to be talking about it. But do you feel like we're getting it right, or is it just something that's talked about a lot, but not really understood?
I think it definitely has become quite a buzzword, and I'm not really sure whether people really understand what it includes. And so there are many different aspects of mental health. So there's the cognitive well-being, which is basically how we think. So wellness in our thought. There's emotional well-being, which is like how we're feeling and whether we're able to handle the stresses of life and whether we're able to regulate our feelings effectively. And then there is behavioral well-being, so what we do. And so that these areas of well-being, I think, are kind of understood and talked about when we're talking about mental health. But something that I'd also like to bring in here is spiritual well-being, which I think is often neglected when we're looking at mental health.
So when you say something like spiritual well-being, I think people's radars go off. They think what you're talking about may be quack, because a lot is sold in the broader umbrella of spiritual well-being, which may not be what you're talking about. For the record, Geti is a psychotherapist at the Safe Space. She has a Fulbright Master's from NYU, so she does know what she's talking about. So when you say spiritual well-being, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, and I totally get that. I totally understand, people's radars going up and then being like, oh, this is, some wishy-washy idea that's being kind of pandered. But I guess what I'm really talking about is this understanding that we're all vessels, like human beings. We're all vessels that are connected to something bigger, and we don't have to believe in that necessarily. But what I've learned through my practice is that this realization that we're all connected, we're connected within our own existence and then with each other and the systems that we exist in. I think that's really kind of helped broaden my own understanding or whatever I've learned in my education and even through my direct experience in my work.
So there's one thing to say something like that, but how do you embody that? I mean, if you go online, there are things like go for a walk, connect with nature, go camping, put your phone aside, disconnect. Is that what you're talking about, or is there a deeper practice that you can recommend to people?
Okay, so something that I learned in my education and through my training was this idea of holding space. So for instance, when I'm working with a client, right? Something that I am taught to do is to hold space for them so that they can bring forward what their deepest thoughts are, and they can kind of explore their really intimate experiences, right? And so when I was going through my education and my training abroad, what I understood from that was, okay, like, let's say, Shehzad, you've come to me for help, right? So, and you're sharing
quite possible that might happen.
I'll make a note of that. So
we'll book an appointment right after this.
Right after. So let's say, you're sharing with me, like, when your symptoms started emerging, what difficulties you're having right now, what experiences you've had. So what I thought holding space meant was, I am going to think about what started your symptoms, like how they came to be. I'll form hypotheses about them based on theories of, human psychopathology that I've learned. Maybe, it has something to do with your relationship with your parents. Maybe it has something to do with, like a traumatic event that you've experienced. And so what I'd be doing while holding space with a client was, I'd just be sitting and thinking. I would just be thinking, Acha, this is what they're telling me. This is a hypothesis. This is how I can form an intervention. This is what I'll say next. But in my practice, when I tried to implement that, what I found was there was something wasn't adding up, like something was not really working. I felt almost removed from the equation. I was feeling like it felt like there was another like entity beside me, like my thinking brain, right? Which is kind of trying to help the person. But then over time, I was like, wait a minute, I'm also a person, right? And so if I just kind of pause my thinking mind for a bit, if I just kind of slow it down and just put it to the side and just accept that maybe I don't know what's going on with them, right? Maybe I cannot effectively come up with a hypothesis because we're equals. And am I making sense here?
You absolutely are. I think there's also this idea, or at least in mass consciousness, that idea that if you go to see a psychologist or you go to see a psychotherapist, there this embodied individual almost treating you like a lab rat. But we human beings are not math, we're people. So seeing human beings as holistically as human beings may be a lot more effective than in your head just forming 2 + 2 is equal to 4.
Yeah, totally. Like it felt almost like I was a robot, right? I was a robot who was just kind of processing information that was being given to me, and I was kind of delivering something in response. But then, so as I tried to slow down my thinking mind, right, what I started experiencing was this connection, this feeling like this. So I could kind of feel what they were feeling, essentially, like almost like osmosis. I also started experiencing their emotions. Okay. And so what I noticed was that's when their own load or their own burden started to become lighter. And I found out that maybe that is what holding space really means. Maybe this is what can heal us, human beings, when we share our burdens with someone who can also help us carry them. And so when I say spiritual, this is what I mean. So I'm talking about having that openness in my own existence, having that space in my own being to kind of support what another person is bringing forward.
I think that is what empathy is all about. So do you also feel when people come to you, are they looking for solutions or are they just looking for someone to listen?
So it's both. And so I think over here, there's some cultural expectations that also come in, especially because therapy is a relatively new, area of work. Like therapy didn't really exist in the way that it currently does, even about 20 years ago. And so people have some preconceived expectations about what it's supposed to be. And so culturally, how we exist in groups and families in which we're told what to do. Even when someone is struggling, the way that people respond to it is by like, kind of समझाना, जैसे कि उनको समझाना कि बेटा इस तरह नहीं, इस तरह सोचो, इस तरह कर लो, right? This is how that's how we've learned to help other people. And so I think when people come to therapy, they have this idea that the therapist is going to tell them how to do things, or like what to think, and like how to be. And that is really not what, I'm supposed to do. That's not what therapy is supposed to do. But also, a lot of the times people just want to be heard as well. So they just want space where someone can truly listen to them.
So, I mean, I'm sure people are looking for prescriptive solutions because it's also hard, right? Putting in the work. Let's say if there's something bothering you or there's unresolved trauma, you don't walk into a therapist's office and it gets fixed in a session or two. It's work that you have to put in for weeks, maybe months, sometimes years. And still it might not get fixed and you might just learn to live with it. But that is a daunting perspective for somebody who's coming to a therapist to just feel better.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense, because I guess a part of what you're saying is also trust building. So, when someone comes in, it's already really hard to even take that step, to take that appointment, to show up for it, and to open yourselves up to another person. So I guess a part of asking the therapist for advice is, checking whether they're reliable or whether they're somebody that, you can open up to. So
how do you do that? So if I'm walking into a therapist's office, I don't know that person, somebody's recommended that person. Is there a checklist? Are the questions I should ask?
I would personally tell you to kind of tune into your own intuition or sense about the person as well. If you see any fears popping up, if there's some like red flags that you're noticing, I would just say that bring them up and see how they're received. And because it takes time to build trust as well, right? It takes time to see whether this is somebody that can actually help you or not.
Sometimes it's not as blatant as faulty credentials. It's almost like a relationship. That person might not be right for you. They may be the best therapist in the city, but they just might not be right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's something that I've also really learned over time in my practice, is that the therapeutic relationship, the relationship that's formed with two people who are collaborating together in this process, that's the most important predictor of the client's healing or recovery, if you want to call it that. And so
if we even do talk about credentials, there's a lot of discussion. There are a lot of question marks now also put on therapy. What particularly did you study? And I mean, let's admit it, we do have a problem with people pretending to be therapists who may not have done their masters like you, who may just have done an online course for a month or two and are calling them therapists and are charging fees. So from the outside, if there are two therapists with fancy offices, I may not know the difference as a layman who has the credentials and who doesn't. So what are the specific credentials that one can look at?
So, I mean, there is a master's degree that you can look at. And then on top of that, you can look at the clinical training that they've done, like whether they had an internship when they were going through their masters. And in that internship, what was the therapeutic modality that they learned or got trained in, how much supervision they went through, how many client hours they completed. And then after completing their program, whether they have found themselves another supervisor. So in my field, it's really essential to be in constant supervision as long as you practice. So, I mean, it's recommended that you have, at least 10 hours of supervision a year, which can kind of keep you, on track in some ways. Like it can, so your supervisor can help you out with any sort of dilemmas or confusion you're having, any areas of struggle in your client work, and also ask if they have been in therapy themselves. So ask your therapist if they've undergone the process and whether they're still undergoing it or not.
I mean, when clients like me exist, of course, the therapist also needs therapy. So there are a lot of these organizations also that are now offering courses or offering diplomas, and people are looking at them. So not to specify any one organization, but can you tell us what they made you do during your masters so that when people look at programs, they can maybe compare and see if it fulfills all those criteria as well?
So in my master's, there was a coursework in which, I mean, there were several courses that I studied, like abnormal psychology. There were some experiential courses as well, in which there were labs where we would go and kind of counsel our peers and have it be recorded and then receive feedback on it. And then aside from that, I did an internship as well at an institute where I got to work with clients actually, and receive supervision, individual supervision and group supervision as well. That kind of helped me in figuring out how to do this work.
So you have a master's in counseling, right?
I have a master's in mental health counseling, yes.
So what did you do in Pakistan, or is there a degree that you did here that you could transition to that? How did it come to be where you thought you should do your master's in mental health counseling?
So actually, Shehzad, I have undergone the training program in counseling here as well. So prior to going abroad for my master's, I did an undergrad in psychology. And while I was going through that, I enrolled in a counselor training program in Lahore, where I completed a certificate in counseling, and then I completed a diploma. And then I went ahead and got enrolled in a master's. I got the Fulbright scholarship.
So you've been on this track for a while at this point.
Could you please repeat?
I'm saying you've been on this track for a while. What did the Fulbright add then? So because for somebody like you who had already done counseling, who had already done an undergrad in psychology, what did the Fulbright in particular add to your repertoire?
So, when I was undergoing training here, I found some missing pieces to the training that I was going through. I mean, there was a lack of diversity, of course. I didn't get exposed to a diverse set of ideas, and there was quite a homogeneity in, the kind of like conversations we were having, and even the groups of people, the populations that I could potentially work with. So my primary motivation to go for my Fulbright was so that I could get exposed to several different ideas, and to kind of learn how to even be in a group of people who are different from me, where everyone is accepted. I really wanted to experience that. And so I think that's what took me there. But as far as just the theoretical training is concerned, I think I learned quite a bit, even in my training here. Like, it really got me into, it really oriented me to think about mental health and to kind of come up with ways to respond to mental distress.
Sometimes when we think of things as being scientific and psychology and biology, we assume they're fixed, whereas once you go and do your master's, you realize how ever-changing the landscape is. You feel like some ideas which are commonplace in Pakistan, especially in psychology, and I've seen some psychologists who have said things which I may disagree with, even things like the DSM-5, which now is considered archaic but is still followed quite religiously in Pakistan. Yeah. Are there ideas that are still being taught in Pakistan, particularly in psychology, that when you go abroad, those ideas have been debunked?
Oh yes, completely. So the idea that the individual is the focus when we're talking about mental health. The idea that pathology is like an individual thing. It's like something that's within a person. It almost sounds like the underlying message is, oh, there's something wrong with this person. And that we need to treat them, and we need to kind of make them better so that they can integrate into society. And I think this idea of this highly individuated lens of looking at mental health was quite prevalent in the even 60s and 70s. But then over time, there was new research and which suggests, that actually it's the power of the human connection. It's actually the collective that has a direct impact on even an individual's mental health, and that we are not meant to be, just complete individuals. Like, we are wired for connection. We are meant to survive with others, in connection to others. And so that's where the work needs to lie,
Unfortunately, whatever was working decades ago, we take that and we bring it here as if that's the only truth that exists. I mean, US itself has such a huge problem with over medication in psychology and psychiatry.
Yeah, and what's sad is that we are a collectivistic society, and so the idea that we are meant to exist in groups and the idea that we need each other has been prevalent in our part of the world for centuries, right? But I guess, and so we're kind of returning to it. I guess collectively across the globe, I think human beings are kind of returning to that realization that, yeah, we're meant to be, with each other. We need others, and that we need to form strong connections with others. And I mean, for a while, there was this high individuation that occurred in other parts of the world. That's where a lot of the research happens. A lot of theories were formulated, which were then taught to countries like ours. But so now that's being challenged as well.
I mean, since the dawn of civilization, or at least Western civilization, it's that Aristotelian idea that man is a social animal. So society also changes things. Society also matters when it comes to mental health psychology. The same disease may not be the same disease if it's happening to somebody in New York and if it's happening to somebody in Karachi. Is that what you're saying?
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that a disease itself occurs when there's isolation and there's extreme individuation. Does that make sense?
Yes,
I guess.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is that a person who's feeling a particular way, thinking a particular way, I mean, they would be considered completely okay, and they might not have any mental health issues if they're in a group of people who hears them out, who understands them, loves them, who accept them. Whereas if the same person is in a group of people where they're not heard, where they're not understood, where they're being rejected, that's where mental distress is actually going to arise. So it's isolation that breeds mental distress.
So saying good mental health happens where you're loved, where you're accepted, where you're not rejected, where you're not insulted. So not a Pakistani household. You've also talked about burnout, and I think especially with COVID, we are not realizing how burnt out this disease has made all of us. It could just be the anxiety of getting COVID or your loved ones getting COVID. And nobody's really realizing why they've become angrier, why they've become crankier, why they have a lot more diseases which are stress related, which may not even be COVID related. So this idea of burnout, which may be alien to a lot of people in Pakistan who are hearing it, who might think, what is burnout? You just work till you die. What would you say to that idea? And for people who are listening who may not even have the vocabulary that they are actually burnt out, what would you say to those people?
I just tell them that it's like, so when we're burning out, it's strange because usually they're trying to work really hard. So for instance, when I felt like I was burning out, what was happening was that I was trying to work really, really hard. I was feeling a lot of pressure to perform perfectly or, really well. And I had really high expectations from myself. But what I wasn't realizing was that during the pandemic, especially, the world itself was not suited to meet all expectations. I mean, it wasn't possible to meet all my expectations in the context that I was in, where, I was indoors, working from home, cut off from others, isolated. And so there was so much stress that was adding, and which I was responding by working extra hard, and it was failing. So it's strange because when people are burning out, they're trying to do a really, really good job, and when they're failing to do that, they're kind of internally beating themselves up about it. They are criticizing themselves for not living up to that expectation, and that actually makes them work less effectively. That actually leaves less energy for them to do the work that they're trying to do very well. And so I guess what I would say to people who are potentially burning out is to slow down, to actually take a break, to actually see if they can find more compassion within themselves for what they're doing, to actually try to understand the context that they're in, to try to try to be more forgiving with themselves, essentially, that it's okay if you don't meet all the targets that you're setting. Those will be met, when it's time, and when they have the energy, they'll be able to do that work that they're trying to do. So yeah.
And also, don't compare. It's fine if Shaheen Afridi is winning the PSL, captaining Lahore at 21 or 22, and you're still doing podcasts at 33. It's fine, Shehzad. It's not a big deal. Don't compare yourself.
There'll be time for you.
So, I mean, it's easy to, all these things are easier said than done, but for some to say those targets will not be met, and it's fine. If I'm setting those targets for myself, fine. But if I have a boss on my head who's setting those targets for me, and my livelihood is at stake over meeting those targets, it's not an option to not meet those targets for those people.
Yeah. And so I think that's where a common misunderstanding sort of emerges when, we hear somebody say something like what I just said, right? So I think people might say, oh, you're saying don't meet targets. You're saying you don't have to do all the work really well. But what I'm actually trying to say is that when internally you shed that expectation, or you stop putting as much pressure on yourself, that actually frees up more energy for you to do that work really well. So if you slow down, and if you are kind of easy on yourself, it will actually propel you to do what you're trying to do, and you'll probably do it better than how you're doing it if you're constantly putting pressure on yourself. So let's say your boss is outside, right? And your livelihood is depending on it, right? But you have to see that your boss is outside. They don't have to live inside your head as well, right? You can kind of let them go and just take a breather. Bring yourself into a state where you're feeling more energetic, where you're feeling more, you're just feeling lighter, right? And then ask yourself if you can do it now. And I would assume that the answer will be, yeah, you were probably more prepared to do the work now that your boss is not, sitting inside you. If that, I don't know if that sounds weird, but like...
Yeah, take 2 minutes for yourself. Hide in the bathroom. If the boss is after your life, breathe, take some deep breaths. It's lovely listening to you and realizing how holistically you're looking at everything, as opposed to maybe a clinical model, which may not look at human beings as holistically. Since you did practice and you were counseling before the Fulbright and after the Fulbright, all these things that you're talking about, how did the Fulbright and the master's program educate and inform you such that these are the opinions you hold now?
I think there's some sort of an integration that's happened. So you know how I was telling you earlier, locally, what we're taught in training programs are these theories which focus on the individual, and they look at psychopathology from a very clinical lens. And of course, I had learned all of that and I understood it. And so when I went on my Fulbright program, I sort of was able to challenge what I had learned previously, and I was able to integrate new ideas into it. And also, I was away from home, right? I was in a completely new, unfamiliar environment, and so that really gave me the opportunity to kind of rethink everything that I had learned in my life prior. And I found myself in a space where I could grow quite a lot, quite rapidly. And I think that's how I kind of started looking at many different aspects, and not just kind of taking in everything that I was being taught, but also asking myself what I thought, right? And maybe I didn't agree with what I was being taught as well. And so yeah, I think that really helped me kind of connect with what I authentically think of mental health.
I've said this so many times now that it's become a cliche, but Fulbright really is the Fulbright experience. It's not just what you study, because when you were talking about it, I was thinking back to my Fulbright experience and my master's, and it's quite similar. Maybe New York just does that to you.
Probably.
Once you're in New York, the city itself speaks to you, and the city itself,
it does.
Brings something alive in you.
Yeah, and it just kind of makes you experience things that you couldn't even imagine experiencing, like feeling things that you didn't even know existed in the human experience.
Yeah, like Tinder. Like I
don't. Well, I mean, that exists here too, not in way.
Thank you so much, Geti, for informing us. For people who are listening, who are thinking about their mental health, is there a message that you would like to give to them?
I just tell them that, you're all loved and you are all worthy of love, more importantly. And just keep giving and receiving as much love as you can.
As good as any words to end this. Love yourself. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And thank you, Geti, for joining us. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you, Shehzad.